once you go live, you'll want to close out of that browser.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you'll get removed.
Chair Boyce, we are now live streaming onto YouTube.
Okay. Good afternoon, good evening. Today is Thursday, June 20th. This is the Technical Advisory Committee for NVTA. Our first action is to review the summary notes from March 20th, and the secondary action is the notes of May 15th. We can knock those out with one motion for both. Do I hear a motion to approve those notes? Motion to approve. Any seconds? Seconds heard. Any opposed? None. All right, let's get into the meat of the matter. Mr. Jasper, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Boyce, members of the Technical Advisory Committee. I'd like to start by playing you a brief video, which will last for 3.5 minutes. I know you're veterans of our process, but just to ensure that you and our vast followers on YouTube are up to speed with our process, this video will give you an overview from the beginning to the end, so that we can all start at the same place, and then I'll take it from there after that.
In Northern Virginia, the demand for transportation improvements outweigh the available financial resources. This reality propels the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority to evaluate and prioritize funding multimodal transportation projects to reduce congestion. This process is accomplished through NVTA's 6-year program. Every 2 years, the 6-year program identifies transportation projects that will be funded with NVTA regional revenue funds. The 6-year program process has 6 distinct phases. Beginning with a call for projects, counties, cities, and towns with a population of more than 3,500, transit agencies and other state and regional entities in Northern Virginia are eligible to apply. The next phase in the process determines which projects are eligible for NVTA funding. Candidate projects must be located in Northern Virginia and must be included in the current version of Transaction, NVTA's long-range transportation plan. The third phase of the process is one of the most robust. NVTA considers 3 quantitative factors for each eligible project. Let's take a closer look at how projects are evaluated. First, NVTA calculates congestion reduction relative to cost, or the CRRC rating. Each project is analyzed to quantify the amount of congestion that would be removed from the transportation system from the first year the project is complete through approximately 20 years from now. This result is then compared to the project cost to arrive at the CRRC rating. Next, we compute a transaction rating for each project. The transaction rating is a combination of 10 performance measures that rate each project on a range of potential benefits, including congestion reduction, access to jobs, safety, and reduction in vehicle emissions. The third quantitative analysis, long-term benefits, looks how closely the transportation impacts of NVTA-funded projects match the share of revenues attributed to each of NVTA's 9-member jurisdictions. This helps to ensure over the long term the benefits of funded projects are fairly distributed across the region. NVTA also considers a range of qualitative factors for each project evaluation, including alignment with NVTA's core values of equity, safety, and sustainability, progress on NVTA-funded projects, if other funding sources have already been committed to the project, and more. The fourth phase of the process is another critical component of the program. NVTA embraces and seeks participation from the community throughout a public comment period. All public comments are recorded and evaluated before a final recommendation is made. Next, in Phase 5, the results of the quantitative and qualitative evaluation, combined with feedback from the public, are used to determine project funding recommendations. NVTA staff develop the initial recommendations and present them to the statutory and standing committees. These committees, in turn, provide their feedback and recommendations collectively to NVTA members. Finally, NVTA considers the staff and committee recommendations and adopts the 6-year program, approving funding for projects across the region. This process demonstrates NVTA's dedication to reducing congestion and improving the quality of life for Northern Virginians. Please visit the novaauthority.org for more information.
Okay, a couple of things. Towards the end of the video, it mentions the committee is rolling forward to the authority meeting. So let me actually start there. You're well versed in this process, I know, but just to be clear for anyone who isn't, the Planning Coordination Advisory Committee, which met earlier this evening, this committee, you make your own endorsements, whatever they are. Hopefully, you'll endorse the staff recommendations, but you will endorse something. And that endorsement will go to the Planning and Programming Committee, which meets on Tuesday of next week. They will take account of this committee and the PCAC's endorsements as they develop their own recommendation to NVTA. And then at the July 11th NVTA meeting, NVTA will take action to adopt a 6-year program based on an understanding of all of the committee actions and anything they want to add themselves to the discussion on that night. So that's the way the process is going to play out. Now, one other thing from the video, there was mention under the qualitative factors of the core values. I just want to reiterate that we did evaluate the core values as part of our process, but we did not apply anything that we learned from the core value analysis in this cycle. So it does not, it's reported out as we found it, but it's not a factor in forming our recommendations. And the reason for that is because what we did with core values was considered a pilot approach. You gave us feedback on that. The other committees have given feedback on that. And so we need to look at that feedback when this process, when this program is concluded before we start the next program as to how we will incorporate, if we will incorporate core values and how that will happen going forward. But it's not part of the recommendations that you have before you. Got a lengthy presentation. You'll be pleased to hear in honor of the 59-minute rule, which may now be a 53-minute rule. Not going to go through all of those slides, but I'm going to skip through most of them, but just wanted to highlight a couple along the way. So in terms of the overview, we have funding recommendations with the highest level of available funding relative to requests in our history at 74%. So in other words, for every $100 in funding requests submitted, we're able to meet $74 of those requests. The original revenue amount is shown there, just under 700 million. Of the 24 candidate projects, we are recommending 22 of them be funded. Of those, 19 to be fully funded with respect to the request, and 3 of the 22 projects to be partially funded with respect to the request. And we are not funding 2 of those candidate projects. And the reason the previous meeting ran late was because of discussion, mostly around the 2 projects that are not being recommended for funding. I'll come back to that in a moment. Also of interest and noted here is that 19 of the recommended projects we've not seen or evaluated before, which we find really interesting because we normally get a decent number of continuation projects that had an early phase funded and come back for subsequent phases. But in this cycle, we're seeing a whole load of different projects, which to us kind of speaks to the fact that we're a long way from meeting the demand for transportation funding in Northern Virginia. It could also be coincidental or not, but this is the first funding program since the current version of transaction was adopted in December of 2022. So that's kind of a reset to the project list. So it may mean that there are a lot more projects in play that will become eligible for funding this cycle. We don't know exactly the reason for that. In terms of the projects, just a few highlights from a multimodal and corridor focus perspective. 6 of the projects that are being recommended relate to 3 of the 5 BRT projects that are in development in Northern Virginia. The VRE Manassas line continues to receive funding from NVTA. One project on the list this evening. And in the outer jurisdictions, particularly in Prince William County, we see a continued emphasis on Route 28 and Route 24/Prince William Parkway. So a combination of outer and kind of orbital most movements through the county rather than coming into the core of the region. Once again, transportation technology projects perform well. They are the top 3 ranked projects this time. And also in this cycle, we're seeing the first funding requests for technology projects in Prince William County at the City of Falls Church. In the last cycle, we saw the first technology project from Loudoun County. And prior to that, the technology projects were mostly focused in Alexandria and Arlington. So whatever's driving it, I don't know, but increasingly the region is looking upon technology, particularly technology funded by NVTA as another pathway for them to go forward. Overall, the recommendations we consider to be geographically and modally balanced. There's at least one project recommended for each of the 10 applicants, and all the primary modes that were represented in the applications have at least one project that has been funded. So I think this is the point where I start skipping slides. So we can just kind of click through these. I'll come back, talk about anything on any of these slides, but in the interest of time and the assumption that you've read the packet, then I'll skip them. Just scroll one more slide. Thanks. The public comment trends. This is looking at all the funding programs from the initial one in fiscal year 2014 to the current one. If you look at the green and the red lines, these represent the number of comments we received in each program and the number of individual commenters that we received. And the reason these are not the same is because commenters can comment on multiple projects, which is a relationship you see here. But wanted to note that since the 2018 to 2023 6-year program, the inaugural 6-year program, the number of comments and commenters have continuously declined. We don't know the reasons for that, but it is one of the things we want to look at as part of our after action review of this cycle is to, are there any things driving that? One thing we know is not driving it is our lack of effort to try and get public comments. That's been at the highest level it's ever been. So that's not the reason we're not getting public comments. With that context, if you then go to the next slide, you've seen something familiar to this in previous cycles. So from the left, we have the project with the highest number of comments, be they support or oppose, and on the right, the project with the lowest number of comments overall, regardless of whether they support or oppose. So the darker blue represents comments that are supportive of the project, and the lighter blue are represented comments that are opposed to the project. And the grey area at the top of each bar is what we refer to here as vague. By that we mean we couldn't quite interpret whether it was a supporting comment or an opposing comment. It was more of, have you thought about doing this or taking that out to the project, as opposed to necessarily saying I support or I oppose this project. So they're recorded, but they're shown in a different color. Go to the next slide. So looking at things in a bit more detail in your packet, at the end of your packet, you should have a table that looks like this. So essentially, I'm going to talk about the 5 projects that are not recommended for funding or only partial funding. I'm happy to talk about any of the other projects, but again, in the interest of time, probably there might be more interest in the projects that are not recommended as opposed to the ones that are. So if a project is recommended for no funding, it's shown with a pink highlight, and there are across the entire row, and there are 2 of those. And then towards the bottom, there are 3 projects where the recommended funding and associated phases are shown in a red font. And all three of those projects are Fairfax County projects. So essentially, the two projects that we're recommending not be funded, one project in the city of Fairfax and one project Arlington County, are projects that have received funding from NVTA in the past. But at the time that they submitted their application, they indicated that with NVTA funding approved, their projects would be fully funded. And we took them at their word. So when they came back and asked for more money in this cycle, even though they weren't really changing the project, they'd simply got further through the project development process. In the case of the City of Fairfax project, they were something like 5 million short. And in the case of the Arlington project, they were a rather larger $21 million short. So essentially we said, no, it would set essentially a precedent to use regional revenues in this way. Typically, if projects come to us asking for more money for whatever reason, typical response is, you have access to your 30% revenues or other funding sources you can apply for. NVTA does not hold contingency funds for overruns or underestimates. Indeed, in the past, we've had policies for such funds, and the authority has taken action to remove those contingency funds on the basis that there are too many unintended consequences associated with having a fund to cover something that may or may not happen, and the process for deciding how to allocate funds that may or may not be available. So we basically don't entertain that sort of request, and so that's why those two projects were recommended for no funding, and the other projects in Fairfax County, the Braddock Road project was recommended for funding sufficient to cover preliminary engineering and right of way, so that will enable the project to get started. But we did not include the construction funding request. For the Fairfax County Frontier Drive Extension and Section Improvements Project, this one had previously declared to us that it was fully funded for PE and for right of way, but did not have all the construction money needed. So because those phases have been declared to be fully funded, we took the same view as we did with the City of Fairfax and the Arlington County projects and said, no, you told us it was fully funded, we'll only fund construction. So for that project, Fairfax County will have to figure out how to backfill any shortfalls they have on preliminary engineering right of way. And the third project from Fairfax County, the Route 7 multimodal improvements between the Beltway and 66. This is a project to basically create space for transit priority lanes. The request was 210 million. As you'll see, it's 23rd out of 24 on the congestion reduction relative to cost rankings. Any project that's at the bottom of this list tends to be the most vulnerable in terms of partial or no funding. And in the case of this project, we recommended funding for PE and I think some right of way, but no construction. Keep in mind that our next COVID projects will open on or about maybe 1 of next year. And so the 3 Fairfax County projects can certainly come back if appropriate and ask for more money. But where we draw the line is you want more money, but you've not changed the scope of the project or previously indicated that it's sufficient funding, then within our current practices, we don't allow that sort of thing to happen. So I think that is all I wanted to cover for now, but I'm so happy to go back to any of this if there are questions.
In the past, there's been a line drawn for the funding
Yes.
Limit is, is the line at the bottom of this table at this time, or is it somewhere up in the 19s?
If we looked at it from the perspective of just from the top, how far down the list could we get before we reach 696 million? Shri, you may need to help me with this precisely, but it'll be somewhere down here because these three Fairfax County projects are very large projects. So, we certainly wouldn't be able to fund that one, the Route 7 project, and a couple above that we may not really be able to cover either.
Probably the last 3 or 4 projects.
Yeah, so this is the funding request, 947 million. So, the difference between them
Route
is
7 alone gets it closer to this.
yeah.
Yeah, 6. And the Braddock Road previously got funding for PE right of way.
No, this is from this program. We've not funded this project.
Oh, that's required. I'm sorry.
The projects that we funded before, the ones
Yeah,
with the little asterisk.
Yep. I'm sorry, I misread it. Any questions on the committee? What's on the table?
I'm just curious more than anything else. It's not I understand the reasoning for the elimination or the exclusion of Arlington County, but I noticed that it's also the highest ranking from support from public comment. So is public comment particularly high from Arlington County? Just because it's denser in a lot of cases, I don't know, just seemed it was extremely high compared to the rest of the projects. I'm just curious.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean anything for this, but I'm just curious about the commenting process.
Well, public comment is meaningful, but on itself, it isn't, a deciding factor on where the funding goes. The things that really we have to adhere to Virginia Code. So HB 2313 has got a couple of things in it, and HB 599 from 2012 also has something in it which we have to adhere to by law. The law does not say anything about how we treat public comment. We do it because we think it's the right thing to do. But to elected officials in particular, but yourself as well, you have to judge what weight to attach to public comment. There's no great science, but I would just express a little bit of caution in simply taking, which project got the most thumbs up, thumbs down, because there's always a context for public comment. So we share it for transparency. In this cycle, it didn't really have as much of an impact on decision or recommendations from us as in previous cycles. Because the amount of money available and other factors were overriding.
Also, especially also given the number of commenters, and given a relatively small number of commenters, you have to be, I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, I the absolute number, I think, for the CC, the DCA project, which was the one with the most public comments, was about 70. We did notice some patterns and the type of comments appearing to be similar, repetitious. Again, not a reason we treat everyone equally, but we see in every cycle that there are various groups that advocate for or against the project, and there's certainly some evidence that was in play, which again is context.
Yeah, as much as anything else, I was just interested in the nature of the public comment. What was going on with public comment in general, or how it was working, not necessarily as it informs the decision you want made. I understand. Thank you.
So you need us to say yay or nay to this?
Yes, please. Yes, please, and that you need to say yay or nay. Not that you need to say yay or nay.
Or nay.
Before that, just a follow-up question. I'm curious about the if you receive some public comments, do you communicate that with the project proposer? Or do you take any do you recommend any mitigation measures if there is a concern about a particular aspect of the project? So how does that, what is general expectation from NVTA about public comments?
Right, yeah, that's a great question. We don't intervene in the details of projects. Applicants have got to decide and put their best shot forward as to what they want to submit to us. They have to get a governing body resolution support to even submit the project. And probably most projects that are submitted to us have been through at least one, if not more, public review processes. So it will be inappropriate, as well as logistically impossible, for NVTA staff to make changes to projects. But in terms of sorry, you had a two-part question. The first part of the question,
Do you communicate back to?
do we communicate it back? Thank you. Yes, we do. The public comments are already posted on our website in full, together with a summary report, which is about 10 or 15 pages with some visualizations. We tell our member jurisdictions, the applicants in particular, to look at the public comments that pertain to their projects and be aware of it. We can't make them do anything, but we draw their attention to them, and we kind of have an expectation that they will take account of them. But because we don't get deeply involved in project development and deployment, we have to trust them to do that.
Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Committee?
I have one. You had mentioned the, certainly costs have skyrocketed, construction costs have certainly increased significantly over the last few years. So there's not any sort of way to account for that in the funding.
In the current cycle, there's nothing in place for staff to do other than to adhere to the practices that we have applied in the past.
Okay.
Now that we're in a state of higher project construction costs escalation, then maybe there's an argument that we should. To be fair, though, the call for projects for this cycle opened in May of last year, and the deadline was July of last year, so about a year ago, less than a year ago. The applicant should have been aware of the inflationary circumstances in which they were submitting their projects, and we would hope that for this cycle they've taken account of those sorts of inflationary pressures. But for previous funding cycles, particularly 4 or more years ago, we were in a low inflation environment, and it may have been the last thing on anyone's mind to take into account, pandemic-induced supply chain logistics and other issues and their effect on project costs. So we understand it's going on, but our view is we've got a set of practices that we apply, and it would be unfair to a lot of applicants who are sucking up this pressure if we changed our processes mid-funding cycle to allow some projects from some jurisdictions to get money this time, when we know of at least one project that was not submitted by jurisdiction because they understood our process was to not use the 6-year program to fund either an overage or an underestimate from previous cycles. So in future cycles, and this is something that came up at the PCAC meeting earlier this evening, they'd like us to look at that, maybe develop some processes to apply for a future funding cycle, which I think as staff, we quite willing to do, but changing the rules mid-process, we were quite firm that we don't believe it's the right thing to do.
Thank you.
Like I say, for the two projects in this cycle, they can come back as of May 1 next year. If their project scope is changed, ask again, but if they previously disclosed the project is fully funded and they've not changed the scope of the project to justify additional funding, we might still be in the same place. But at least we'd be starting from a position where everyone would know, be involved in the process and whatever solution comes out.
Sorry, I have one more question. How does the funding, like by jurisdiction, how does that, is it kind of within the target ranges?
The long-term benefit you're referring to?
I'm sorry?
Long-term benefit?
No, like Arlington County, Fairfax County, et cetera. The next slide has the percent of total on the funding by jurisdiction, so.
If I can read the tea leaves that you're trying to ask,
Yeah.
there's the equity between jurisdictions
Yeah.
that needs to be kind of met. I think that's the spirit of her
Yeah,
question.
that's long-term benefit, which is a legal mandate, which basically says emphasize long-term benefit. It's a calculation that we must do to make sure that the benefit that our member jurisdictions are receiving from our regional revenues is approximately equal to the share of the revenues attributed to and received from the jurisdiction. So we currently have an imbalance with Prince William being a little on the high side, and Arlington being a little on the low side, and Alexandria is also a little bit on the low side. But in order to correct that, we need enough projects in the candidate pool to be able to make up the difference for the jurisdictions that are lagging. And we also need some target projects from the jurisdictions that are exceeding. So we can basically say, well, normally we would have funded that project and not this project, but because of long-term benefit, we'll fund this project instead of that project. And those factors weren't really in play in this cycle. We were able to meet 75% of the requests. We were able to get a long way down the list before any of these other factors even really became relevant. But in the case of long-term benefit, we'd have to not recommend at least one, possibly two, possibly three of the lowest performing Prince William County projects, and instead allocate that funding to an Arlington and possibly an Alexandria project. Well, all the Alexandria projects are recommended for funding anyway, if we can't give them more money than they've asked for. And in the case of Arlington, they were on the wrong side of the line in asking us to fund a project for which they had already declared it was fully funded. So there's no way we could, in good faith, apply our practices and fund the project for long-term benefit reasons, when to fund that project would bring about a stream of unintended consequences and potential, allegations of unfairness in application of our process from jurisdictions who didn't even apply because they felt those factors would run against them. So we still have to balance long-term benefit, but because we're updating every 2 years, it's not like a one and done opportunity, and we'll have to work with the jurisdictions about what they submit to us. One of the things we've noted with Arlington is they tend to submit a relatively small number of projects, which are usually very much below the average project cost relative to the other peers in the candidate pool. So in order to address the long-term benefit issue in Arlington County, we need more projects in Arlington County, and we need bigger projects in Arlington County, or something else. It's not very easy for us to go to Prince William County and say, hey, you guys are doing too well, don't submit as many projects next time. No, we don't say that to Fairfax or Laramie or anyone else, so it's balance.
Is there also part of the equation that the improvements in Prince William County benefit other jurisdictions like Fairfax? Route 28 would improve conditions in Fairfax since it's right on the line.
Well, I mean, certainly the way we calculate long-term benefit, the project benefit may extend beyond the boundaries.
Right.
Of the
And
jurisdiction.
we're getting off the topic, but this has always been a question every year we go through this is, you're giving Prince William who submitted the application for 28, but that improvement impacts Fairfax County, and by extension, you can go all the way on 66 corridor. Similar projects around the area.
Yep.
Anything in Manassas Park is going to be good for 28 or.
Yep.
If that's in the equation there.
And I see what you're getting at, Mr. Chair. When we receive projects from Fairfax and Prince William, you're talking about the largest and second largest localities in the Commonwealth. Their projects, scope and scale, are going to be larger. They are going to probably pull in more benefits for other parts of the region outside of Fairfax and Prince William County. But I will say Arlington's projects are also beneficial to the region. The scope and scale are smaller, but they are beneficial. I think this gets back for this CC to DCA, what Keith said, we have 696.3 million in available revenues, but the ask was 947 million. We always knew that there was going to be a project or two or three that we would not be able to recommend funding. And their project happened to come in lowest for congestion reduction relative to cost.
Right. And they had funding from before. And there's other things that enter into that equation. Any other questions? Yes.
And it's just for informational purposes.
Yep.
Just looking at this larger chart, I noticed that the Frontier Drive extension also indicates that it was potentially fully funded. Did they add to the scope of it? Is that what happened? Because it's not fully funded. You partially funded it, but
We partially funded it because part of the request was for preliminary engineering and right of way, which in previous funding rounds, they had said our funding from previous funding rounds fully met their needs for PE and right of way. So to apply our practices consistently, we did not feel that we could fund phases, but we could fund construction because we haven't funded construction for that project previously. But it leaves Fairfax now having to backfill where they fund their shortfall in PE and right of way. But our advice, I guess, certainly our interpretation would be if a project is asking for PE and construction. You guys are engineers in the business. If they have not done, in some cases, not yet started their PE, how confident would you be in that construction estimate, and would you declare it as fully funded? That's the dilemma they face. They said it was fully funded, and they got their funding on the basis of that. And now they're telling us it's not fully funded. Sorry to hear that. We understand the economic circumstances that everyone's facing in engineering, construction, but NVTA can't help.
yeah, it's a pretty substantial difference in PE, right? I mean, $50 million just for those, not even talking about construction. So, yeah, interesting. So to your point, it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see whether or not construction, they're not those other ones, how that goes. So, yeah, so it meets the logic you would use. I was just curious because I noticed the note. That's all. That's what I assumed.
And if I could, Mr. Chair, I would add, because when we talk about cost overruns, and Yes, maybe, because that's what Keith had noted, the PCAC asked us to explore, could we do something? We still have to go back and run the model to look at how does the project perform for congestion reduction relative to cost. Even if there is a cost overrun and they come back and reapply, the authority in working with committees would still have to make a recommendation. I reminded the PCAC early on years ago, we had a contingency reserve and a transportation reserve. They were really policies with names with no verbiage. And we as staff was supposed to come up with verbiage. But one of the things that stood out the most is, and not saying anyone would ever do this, we didn't want to incentivize lowball. You get the funding on the front end saying your project was 20 million, but it was really 40 million. And then who gets the money first? Because it's never going to be a situation where only one project has cost overruns. We talk to the project sponsors all the time. It's never going to be a one project has cost overruns. So then would we be setting up another process to try to deal with the overrun submission, and how would we work that out? We have encouraged applicants to ask for a little more than you need. And I know it puts people in a gray area because of congestion reduction relative to cost. People want the projects to score well, but it's better to ask for more. We pay on a reimbursement basis. You know, if your project closed out and you didn't use it all, we're going to move it back to the regional revenue fund. That's a better option than, oh, I need more. And then we have, you know, what other funding options are available? Does the timing work out? It's a whole myriad of things that we consider.
Okay. Guess we need to make a motion whether we accept this or not, make Mr. Jasper happy.
Would make a motion to accept the recommendations. I said,
2 seconds. Anybody opposed? Seeing none, unanimous passage
thank you.
of the motion.
Thank you. Make me happy.
Well, just because of that. Preliminary deployment plan.
Just very, very quickly,
PRD.
I got 3 minutes and I'm not going to take it. We're in the middle of a two-part process with the authority to have a work session spread over 2 meetings, the June and July meeting, to obviously the June one's already happened, to explain some of the things we've learned so far in the development of the preliminary deployment plan through our data gathering and public engagement processes. And the July meeting will be discussing that a little bit more and seeking guidance and feedback from them that they would like us to take into account as we move into phase 2 of the PDP, the preliminary deployment plan, where we'll begin to do the analytics work. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be even more brief. Oh, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to say,
Sorry.
I stopped by the pop-up public participation piece you had down at the Eden Center a couple of Saturdays ago. Weren't a lot of people interested in BRT on the Saturday afternoon at Eden Center, I gotta say. But your people who were there were giving it a heroic effort.
They're nothing if not enthusiastic. Thank you for dropping by. My understanding it was a very hot afternoon. We can go there, but we can't make people talk to us.
I think the staff at least got good lunches that day.
Mr. Chairman, I would know 2 things: that we are hosting a State of Regional Transportation Network that will be October 30th. It will be here in our new office space on the 6th floor. We will be sending a save the date. And then the same month of October, October 9th, we will be hosting our annual ITS Transportation Roundtable. So we will send more information as those 2 events develop. And that's all I have.
On the ITS Virginia board now, so I'm hearing all that.
Oh, good.
So I don't have enough to do. I think that's it. I guess we have the motion to adjourn.
So moved.
There, go.